Welcome to the Dark Side of Soul podcast. This is Joe.
This is Sean.
We'd like to thank you for joining us on this lovely day. We're entering the heat of summer already. And when you are in the drips of summer, that's a new term I'm coming up with, the drips
of summer. That's a new podcast idea, the drips of summer.
That was my band in college.
So not the boys of summer, you were the drips of summer.
Yeah. It was kind of it was grunge new age.
Okay. You weren't a what's his name? The lead singer for the Eagles.
Don Henley?
You're not a Don Henley cover band? The Drips of Summer.
The Drips of Summer. It just... Okay, that's gross. I don't know. That was gross. Anyway.
Introduction.
We're in the middle of the Drips of Summer. You know, you tend to want to, chill with some horror films. So that's our talk, where we're going to talk about today. But first, we're going to talk. We wanted to remind you that we do also run the Dark Side of Soul Ghost Walk right here in the lovely city of Seoul, where we are. It is. We also run our Facebook page at facebook.com/darksideofsoul. You can join our watch parties, horror movie watch parties, and also on our Instagram, Dark Side of Soul on Instagram. The Patreon, we do have run our Patreon at patreon.com/soul Dark Side of Soul. Patreon.com/Dark Side of Soul. And this isn't, we're not begging for money here. We actually give you extra content. If you like the show, just for a pittance more per month, you can get way more content. Our top tier patrons even get swag mailed to them in their mailbox, physical swag, which I just ordered. I just sent out this month's swag.
Sweet. And then another thing to say, Joe, before we move on, introduce our guests.
We have a guest.
We do have a guest.
Do you want to introduce?
Guest. I'll introduce the guest. But before we do that,
the radio voice.
But before we do that, I want to say to any of our listeners, if we were currently looking for anyone Korean or non-Korean who may have had a supernatural experience while in Korea. And there's a reason for this, because we're putting together a book. We are going to publish a book about modern ghost experiences in Korea. So if anyone has had some sort of experience that could be unexplained, ghostly, supernatural, paranormal in any way, send us a message. Or you can email me directly at hone.obsim@gmail.com. That's HONE.OBSIM@gmail.com.
Yeah, you can do it through the Facebook page. Sean, maybe it's easier if they do it through the Dark Side of Soul mailbox.
That's another way. If you send a message through Dark Side of Soul, that's another way.
Info at darksideofsoul.com. And
that's right. Yes.
Sean will get it that way.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Giving everyone out your personal email address.
Oh, well, I'm fine with that. That's okay. Right. It's easy to block people.
That's why my mail's not getting through. Okay.
But moving on then so when Joe and I were thinking about topics for the podcast a couple months ago, one of the first ones that I thought that for sure that we had to do was about Korean horror films. And we thought about our guests. And one of my coolest, newest friends that I met a few months ago was Pierce. And I thought, Pierce is an expert on film, and I want him on the episode to talk about Korean horror films. So, everyone, say hello to Pierce. How's it going,
Welcome, Pierce?
Hey guys, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Pierce Conran. I should say your first. Is it Conran or Conran? I don't think I've ever asked you that.
Yep, Conran. That's right.
Conran. Yeah.
He tells you how to pronounce his name. Unlike Joel.
Joel. Yeah.
Bonomini.
So Pierce, yeah. So definitely you were the guest that I had in mind when I wanted to do this episode. So how about first just kind of introducing yourself to the listeners, some of your background, maybe in Korea, but also in film.
Sure. So I'm from Ireland. You might not really sound that way in my voice because I grew up in Switzerland. But in any case, I've been in Korea for 8 years. And for basically all of that time, I've been working in the Korean film sector in various ways. My main job is with the Korean Film Council. I'm the English editor of their website, which is called KOBIZ. That's koreanfilm.or.kr. I run a blog called Modern Korean Cinema. I'm a Korean film critic for Anarchy, film website, covers a lot of horror, among other things. And then I just do lots of other little things. I produce films with an independent filmmaker here called Isangu. We've made some very colorful films of titles such as I Am Trash and Dirty Romance and Pervert Boy. And
those are not categories on RedTube, right?
Well, with some luck, we'll see. And I also do some broadcasting on KBS, TBS, Arirang, things like that. So anything that's kind of Korean film related, I try to kind of nibble on the edges of, basically.
Nice. What was your initial interest in film itself? So we're going to get into the horror genre. But what was your interest in film initially? What brought you into that art form?
Honestly, I think growing up as an only child in a foreign country, that was kind of a big part of it. And my father always was away on business most of the time. And then particularly when I went back to Ireland for boarding school, and that was not a very fun experience for me, to be honest. And just
I went to boarding school. I loved it, but okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well,
mine was more like Harry Potter, school. But yeah.
Mine was not Harry Potter. But what did happen was the second year I was there, they opened a big new shopping center, which included like a 13-screen multiplex, and that just became my new home. And I just kind of saw all the new releases, and that was it. And then I ended up doing film in university, and yeah, that's been it ever since. Just movies.
Living the dream.
So what year was that? Like roughly, like when you?
Let's see.
How old were you? I guess. Yeah.
When that theater opened, that would have been 1999. I would have been 13, I think.
Okay. Right on. What was the first film that you remember seeing there?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll tell you the first R-rated film I saw was The Way of the Gun there.
Okay. Nice.
But I'm not sure what the first one was. I mean, there would have been like American Beauty I would have seen at that time. But that would have been a few months in. What would have been a few months? Because that would have been like September 1999. So I can't remember exactly what came out in September 99.
Right. Okay, Joe, what was the first movie you remember seeing in cinema?
Oh my gosh. Drive-in cinema? Or...
Oh, well, okay. Well, yeah, sure. Because that was...
cinema.
Okay.
Yeah.
My parents back in the day, there was a drive-in cinema, and they would pop popcorn in the house and go out there, and I would usually fall asleep in the back seat. I was 3 years old, and they would go watch softcore porn at the drive-in, like Emmanuel or something like that. Yeah. Okay. First ones Star Wars. I think Pete's Dragon. But I think Star Wars was the first I remember seeing in the theater.
I'm pretty sure, and I should ask my mom about this just to make sure.
I'm old.
But I think the first movie that I saw in cinema was the Care Bears movie.
That's awesome. So you remember that?
Yeah. And I do remember that. And I remember
I remember when that came out too, man.
Yeah, that was like 84, 85.
Yeah.
I was young. I was a little kid. I was 5 or 6 years old. So
I was heavily going to theater in 84.
At that time, yeah. So I remember
pedantic.
Which one?
No, mine's just pretty lame. It was I can't remember exactly which one it was, but it was the earliest memories are either E.T. or Bambi. So it would have been a rerun from one of those.
Well, E.T. Yeah. Well, even
E.T.
films.
Yeah, E.T. was the first movie I loved. I just went to go see again and again and again. E.T. was the summer of '82 was crazy awesome for movies.
Well, I remember
it was great.
I remember being at a mall or something with my mom, and we're walking through, and I saw the poster for the Care Bears movie, and we had no plans to go. And I said to her, it's like, Mom, I really want to see that movie. And she's like, oh, we don't have any time. We got to get back home. We got to get dinner. Your dad and your brother and your sister are going to be home. We got to get back home. And I said, but the man on the TV said, go see it with someone you care about today. And I care about you.
Oh.
She went straight to a payphone, because of course there weren't no cell phones yet. Went straight to a payphone. She called my dad. She's like, we're going to see the Care Bears movie. and then that was very likely my first, that's my earliest memory. And I was really young. So it's very likely my first.
So that was your introduction to horror.
No, not horror. My introduction to horror is different. We'll get to that in a little.
Because I think my introduction to horror was even before I saw my first movie. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, what was that?
Exorcist.
How old were you when you saw it?
I might have been around 3. Yeah, 3 or 4.
Okay.
I think my uncle was watching it, and it's affected me for life. It's still my favorite horror movie. Still,
I still really love The Exorcist. I saw The Exorcist probably when I was older. I'd already been well versed in horror by that time. Probably. Maybe like I was like 12 or 13 years old. I was already watching Hammer horror and Amicus films and stuff like that by this time. I'd seen Rosemary's Baby, Night of the Living Dead, and all that kind of stuff before I saw The Exorcist. And but my greatest memory of The Exorcist was seeing the 30th anniversary edition in cinema here in Korea.
Oh, that's a good one.
In 2003. Yeah. Oh, wait. Yeah. That was the 30th.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one with the extra stuff with her crawling upside down the stairs.
The spider walk and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And the stuff that you hear about, they call it, the folklore, the urban legends of the film of The Exorcist, is that people ran out of the cinema screaming. When I went in, I was with my girlfriend at the time. When we went in and sat down, the cinema was full. Wow. It was full. By the time the movie was finished, at least a third of the cinema, a third of the moviegoers left. Yeah. A third of it was empty.
It's too scary.
People left. They left. They ran out. Because when The Exorcist was released in 1973, it didn't get a release in Korea. It was banned. Yeah. And they didn't get a cinematic release until 2003. It got released probably on VHS or something, or a beta or something leading up to that. But there was no cinematic release until 2003. So yeah. But then, okay, so Joe, that was your introduction to horror. Pierce. Introduction to horror.
I honestly don't remember. I'm a big horror fan now, but I wasn't when I was younger. I used to hate horror films, to be honest. And there might be several reasons for that. One of them is that I'm a total scaredy cat. Yeah. I still.
That's why we watch them. Yeah.
So kind of half covering my ears when I go to the cinema. It's a good thing I only have one working ear. It's very easy to do that without being too noticeable. But the earliest thing that really freaked me out, I don't remember exactly what the film was. It was one of those Tales from the Crypt films. I would have been super, super young.
The Amicus films?
I think so. I was really, really young, and it freaked me out, and I wasn't allowed to finish watching it, and I had nightmares for weeks apparently.
Oh yeah.
I think
Exorcist
it was Tales from the Crypt film.
Gave me nightmares for over a decade.
But was it the Amicus films or the Tales from the Crypt ones that were made in the 90s after the show?
I think it was the 90s ones. I don't think it was Amicus.
Okay.
It was
Blood,
roughly contemporaneous, kind of TV movie style something. I don't know what one it was. I would have only seen a portion of it, but that was enough to scar me at that time in my life.
Right. So it had the Crypt Keeper in it, like the puppet.
Oh God, I don't remember.
Okay.
I just remember. It out. I think it was a Tales from the Crypt film. That's my memory of my first horror.
Right. My first horror film that I remember seeing, I was probably about 8 years old, and it was on Betamax for For people who don't know, beta was what predated VHS, superior medium as well. And
very bulky.
Yes. And it was An American Werewolf in London.
Good one.
Ooh.
Yeah. And still one of my favorite films. Not just, I'm not giving it the genre. One of my favorite films is An American Werewolf in London. Yeah. And I couldn't really understand when I was a kid why I liked it, what I was drawn to, the David Kessler character.
I saw it when I was a kid, and I couldn't watch it again until I was an adult.
I've seen that movie at least. It's probably along with like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Ghostbusters, and a few other movies. The movie that I've seen the most. I've probably seen that a good 50 times.
Wow.
And when I was a kid, yeah, okay. but when I was a kid, like I loved it, but it scared the shit out of me, no doubt. But I couldn't really understand what it was that drew me to that film. It wasn't until I was older and I could kind of more intellectually understand what was going on, is that David Kessler, the main character of David Kessler, he's a victim. He's a monster who doesn't want to be a monster, which is the same as the Larry Talbot character in the original Universal horror film, The Wolfman. Yeah, so Lon Chaney Jr. He doesn't want to be a monster. He's a victim, and he becomes a monster, and he's killed for being a victim. I think that's there's a very deep emotional connection to things like that. For us to be victims of things that we do, for negative things that we portray or that we do, that we didn't want to do these things, but we end up doing them, and so we become the victim. I think these films are commentaries on things like that.
On injustice.
With these werewolf films, particularly American Werewolf in London, but also The Wolfman and a bunch of other stuff. From what I understand, they're just commentaries on. They're like allegories for anti-Semitism, basically. I mean, obviously, American Werewolf in London is very pointed, but even The Wolfman and a lot of like literature around Wolfman characters, Lupin kind of stuff is does kind of figure a lot of kind of anti-Semitism vibes or just commentaries about it.
Yeah, well, that makes sense for especially The Wolfman, because the screenwriter Kurt Siodmak, he escaped Germany prior to World War II. And he wrote the screenplay for that film, and it's very likely that there are the commentaries on anti-Semitism.
When did The Wolfman come out? It's a bit later than the first cycle of the universe films. It's like early 40s?
41. Yeah.
So it's during the war.
So 10 years during the war, 10 years after Dracula.
It was in one of the watch parties, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've played The Wolfman twice in the watch party. It was the very first film I played when we did the Dark Side of Soul watch parties, and I played it again about 2 months ago.
Terrific film.
Yeah, excellent film. Despite the plot hole, why is he wearing a shirt? In the transformation scene, he's wearing a strap shirt. Why has he got a button-up shirt when he's fully? Did he put the shirt on after he became? He's like, I got to dress up before I go and kill people.
Maybe that's the same way like Donald Duck wears a shirt but no pants.
Well, there you go. But the whole thing was that Jack Pierce, who did the special effects for that film, the practical makeup and whatnot, he was like, well, to save money, just put the Wolfman in a shirt. So I only have to put from the neck up and his hands and his feet. I only have to do the makeup for that, not his whole torso. And they did the same thing for Werewolf of London a few years before with Hull. But the transformation scene, which there actually isn't a full transformation, you only see his feet transform. He's wearing a strap, an undershirt with no sleeves. So a bit of a plot hole, but that's fine. Still a great film. One of my favorite films of all time as well. So, so An American Werewolf in London. And then for my first horror film. But then Pierce, what initially brought you into Korean horror specifically?
I mean, it's just really me watching a lot of Korean films. I got into Korean cinema kind of by accident. And this would have been around maybe 18 years ago. The first Korean film I saw was Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, the first in the Vengeance, Park Chan-wook's famous Vengeance trilogy. And I kind of watched it by accident because I was watching a lot of Japanese films at the time. I was into modern Japanese cinema, Takashi Miike, things like that. And I was in a DVD store and in the kind of East Asian section, and I just saw a DVD that looked really cool, and I just assumed it was Japanese, and it wasn't. And actually, the funny thing is, when I first watched it, once I realized it wasn't Japanese, I finished watching it and I kind of hated it. It really upset me. I thought it was incredibly cruel, and I just couldn't understand it. I thought, who would make this? Who would be so wantonly cruel? What's the point of this? This is just so empty of anything human. And I was so angry. I would tell people around me about this movie that upset me so much, and but I just couldn't stop telling people. So obviously, this movie had really marked me somehow. And eventually, a few weeks later, I watched it again. And at that time, I still didn't really understand where it came from, but I realized, oh, actually, this movie is. It's brilliant. It's really remarkable, and now I want to know more. And that kind of that set me on my journey, as it were, to discover more Korean films, and through Korean films to discover more about Korean society, and then eventually find my way here 8 years ago.
Oh wow, good.
But to answer your question, the first horror film I would have seen was probably Whisper in Corridors. That would have been a readily available film around that time. So I would have seen that. So I would have seen that. I probably saw Tale of Two Sisters around that time as well, which remains very much a favorite. And so those would have probably been the first two K-horrors I saw as they were dubbed.
Oh, nice. I can't remember probably the first Korean horror film I saw was in Korea, and it was very likely A Tale of Two Sisters, which for people who love that film or know about the film, it's an excellent film, and it's an excellent film adaptation of an old folktale. People know on the Dark Side of Seoul, when I do my tour, a lot of my focus is on Korean folklore, with a big focus on, of course, ghostly folklore. And I do the series here on our Patreon, Weird Tales from Korean Lore. So the story of Two Sisters is an old Korean folk story and a folk tale, but there have been numerous versions of that, at least 6 or 7 that I know of, going back to the 40s, maybe the earliest one.
I think the most famous previous one was in the 70s by the director Shin Sang-ok. That's the director who was kidnapped by Kim Jong-il into North Korea. So that was obviously before he was kidnapped, but I haven't seen that. But certainly, from what I understand, I know that the text a little bit, and Kim Joon's Tale of Two Sisters seems to depart from it quite radically.
They essentially just they keep the main premise, but it's a massive departure from the tale itself. Joe, have you seen that?
It has Moon Gun-young in it, doesn't it?
That's right. Yeah, she's the younger sister.
Yeah, she's cute. I like her a lot. No, I haven't seen it. No, does that say to me? I'm kind of a wuss when it comes to horror movies, so I don't see a lot of them, but I read about them on Wikipedia.
Right.
A Tale of Two Sisters, I think, stands up as the scariest Korean horror film. There's only a few scenes in it that are very scary, and I rewatched it recently, and there's it's still extraordinarily effective. So that's pretty remarkable. 17 years on.
Well, what scares you? What's frightening for you?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, there's just the construction of it, because you have Kim Joon is one of the great stylists of Korean cinema, and he's worked across a lot of different genres, and his skills kind of to find a way to technically make a genre work, make something pop. And so it wasn't his first horror, because his first film was also a horror of sorts. It was a comedy horror, The Quiet Family, but it was his first and only pure horror film. Mm-hmm. And so he really kind of dives into it, and it's kind of chamber piece and kind of very big psychological story. And the way he films it, and the way it's staged with the production design and the sound in Kim Joon's films is always very, very detailed. And it's just amazing. But there's for anyone who hasn't seen it, I don't want to spoil it, but there are two very clear scenes where, you know, you have it's not really jump scares. You have a bit of that, but it's more kind of just sort of building dread. If you're into Japanese horror, I would kind of compare it more to something like Pulse than to the more well-known JR films like The Ring and The Grudges. It's not like that. It's more, there's more that dread of Pulse, or something. There's something behind it, and there's something that kind of builds inside you. And so when you have these moments where he turns up the scares, it's already kind of been inside you, and it just freaks you out more. It's very impressive.
Very visceral. It gets right into your emotion. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think a big part of that film, A Tale of Two Sisters, and the folk story itself, the tale that inspired it, is that you really care about those characters. There's an essence to those characters that I think people can relate to, and I think that really creates an atmosphere for that film around the characters themselves. Where say like Gothic horror creates an atmosphere around the settings, but that film creates the atmosphere around the characters, and that really draws you into the characters. You can relate to them in a lot of ways, especially the two sisters themselves. So, excellent film. One of my favorites. That was also on the horror watch party. Probably the second or third week. I don't remember, but it was the first Korean horror film we showed on the horror watch party.
Now, Pierce, you mentioned before that you were first into Japanese cinema before you got into Korean. Would you say Korean is Korean horror unique in a way?
Absolutely. I think it's kind of unfairly labeled as kind of piggybacking on J-horror around that time. But how much truth is there to that? So certainly films like The Ring and The Grudge were far more popular, but I mean, The Ring came out in 1998, right? It was the same year as Whispering Corridors. They're both there. They both have similar templates. It's this kind of, these kind of grudge stories. Vengeful female ghosts. That's shared folklore between Japan. And Korea.
That's Asian ghosts. Asian ghosts tend to be pissed off young females.
Exactly.
The Chenya yeah.
And so I think it's a bit unfair, but at the same time, it is true that a lot of the Korean horrors that kind of came about after that first little wave, films like Whispering Corridors, and then its sequel Memento Mori, which is absolutely amazing, and A Tale of Two Sisters. Then you start to have more generic K-horrors, and some of those are they're kind of they're copying the previous good K-horrors. They're also copying those J-horrors. But then what makes the Korean horror films different is, well, first of all, I'd say it's better production values for sure. And I think these days there's been kind of an interesting evolution with Korean horror cinema. The Korean horror films do go back quite far, but they're for several decades they're not films that you would really consider scary, but they do they count as horror films because they're about these. They're either about like a gumihos, like the 1,000-year-old fox, or you have other. I forget the name of a few of them, but other kind of female grudge spirits kind of stories. But then it was as the industry kind of modernized in the 90s, it kind of starts taking these kind of folklore templates and putting them into these kind of American genre styles, as well as perhaps some Japanese styles, and that became kind of the more popular and more viscerally effective K horror. And but what I think has been really interesting in the last few years, because there was really a lull for K horror for quite a long time. There was a good decade where pretty much all the K horrors coming out were lamentable, honestly, with a few bright spots here and there. But there's been a resurgence now, much as there has been a resurgence in horror in general around the world, or at least that it's been more widely accepted as mainstream, and it does seem to be higher quality. But one thing we're seeing changing in K horror is how they're embracing shamanism in Korean horror, which I think is great. And that really gives Korean horror a unique flavor. So then you have films like The Wailing, and one of my personal favorites is The Wailing is one as well, but a lesser well-known one is Possessed, which I think is an absolutely incredible film. and people don't know that movie. It failed here. It didn't go to festivals around the world, and people don't talk about it. It's from 2009. The director, that was his first film. His name is Lee Yong-ju, and his second film was a massive hit. That was Architecture 101, complete 180. Melodramatic, like romantic drama, a nostalgia romantic drama, and but his first film is just really remarkable. It's sorry, I'm jumping into this now, but it's about a college girl who returns home because her sister has gone missing. So she goes back to her mother's like dilapidated old apartment block, and she's like the mother is like a very fervent, a religious nut would be the only fair way to describe her. And but there's a shaman who lives in the building, and there's a bunch of people who kind of follow this shaman, and they want her very effective talismans apparently. And so then the mystery, then there's a cop who's kind of who's been brought in to kind of find the missing girl, and he doesn't care. But then weird things start happening, people start dying, and the shamanism starts to kind of overtake the Christian element, and there's this clash between them. The shamanism parts are just absolutely amazing, and I think without Possessed, the Wailing wouldn't exist the way we know it. For one thing,
right? Yeah, that's very likely true. Yeah, I appreciate that as well. And one of the things I really like about horror, well, weird fiction generally, not just horror fiction, because I agree with a lot of people say, like Stephen King, who will say horror itself isn't a genre; it's a subgenre of thriller. And then you have all the larger subgenres, which like folk horror. And then I think, which has its root in England, of course, but Korea, I do think, has its version of folk horror. And its approach to it is using its folklore as a premise or a foundation for these particular films. But I do know people who kind of don't like The Wailing. People, especially shamans, they're like, no, that's not the way it is. But that's, in the way I view it, is like, that's completely fine, because shamanism is very regional. Like all folklore, it's regional. And Korea was separated by mountains and vast valleys and whatnot. So the shamanism of Jeju-do is not the shamanism of Seoul. And a lot of
it was also never mainstream. It was really pushed to the fringes. People were they're considered heretics pretty much. And
for a long time.
So if you don't have that kind of standardization, so you have these kind of factions kind of grow into their own things far more readily, I suppose.
It definitely. A lot of them, I think for these films that really draw upon shamanism, Korean shamanism, the mudang, to give them a background, a source of that's the word I'm looking for. To give the film the depth, to give a source to the film itself. They're looking at things that are regional. So I can see how it could piss off, say, shamans in the Seoul area, because they were quite different from shamans from around the country. Like, I've been to shamanic ceremonies, rituals in Gyeongsan. And Gyeongsan is one of the mountains in Seoul, which is the Rooster Dragon Mountain, where people for generations, for a very, very long time, have been going to try to commune with the mountain spirit, with the Sanshin. And communing with the spirit for them would mean then they would be given the powers of the shaman. So that's a regional thing. But in Seoul, the central focus of shamanism is in Wangsan. And their views were completely different. They were, when all that was established, when Seoul became the capital city, they were on the opposite side of the mountain. They weren't allowed in. They were oppressed initially. It's all this kind of regional aspects that you can't pin down to a single film. So when these films show specific things, within Korean shamanism. It might be regional, so I don't understand specifically how people don't like it. But go ahead.
I would say with one of the things that makes shamanism so interesting in cinema, and is that it's an aspect that people generally aren't incredibly familiar with, whether, especially if they're foreign viewers. But I think in Korea as well, there's something very, something very mystical. There's something, there's something unknowable about shamanism, and then people are scared about this kind of unknowable thing. And so that, in one sense, makes it a very effective tool in a horror film, because it's that thing where you can kind of spin out some pestilential dread. You can do something very kind of scary with shamanism, but at the same time, that often means that filmmakers aren't necessarily using shamanism to kind of shine a light on what shamanism is, and they're using it as a tool. So they're using it in a sense negatively, and they're creating and they're making a negative portrayal. And I think Na Hong-jin, the director of The Wailing, is absolutely guilty of that. I think Na Hong-jin is a fantastic filmmaker. He's one of the greatest filmmakers in the country, let alone the world. I should have said that the other way around. But I don't think he gives a damn about shamanists and all that. I think he finds it very interesting. And I think he's something about him is something in his nature is quite cruel, and he has a very wicked sense of humor. And I think he recognized something that could be mined to create an effect that would be very effective. And that certainly is the case. So I would understand perhaps if shamanists were not too thrilled about the portrayal of their culture in The Wailing.
Yeah, and religion has been a source of inspiration for horror films since the beginning. It's going way back to silent cinema. Or Haxan, the whole point of Haxan is the witchcraft through the ages, and so it's my cat's scratching on the door. You might hear the cat in the background. Religion's just been a source, and I think shamanism being the source of Korean horror films makes sense, because shamanism is Korea's only ancient endemic religion. Everything else was introduced. So from Buddhism to Confucianism to Taoism to Christianity to Islam to Judaism, it's all been introduced. So for Korea, for example, to make a film, I think, where Christianity is kind of the focal point, to make a horror film where Christianity is the focal point, they don't often work, I think. There is a Korean, maybe Pierce, you might know.
There have been a couple. You're probably thinking of The Priest, which is a massive hit, and it's totally just trying to copy The Exorcist.
Exactly.
And actually, what's interesting is I don't really like the movie, but it was a massive hit. It was like 7 million people saw it.
I don't like that movie at all.
The most interesting scene in the film is the isolated shamanism scene. That is by far the most interesting.
That's right, because that gives it Korean flavor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like one of the main characters of The Wailing is the woman in the village. Now, a lot of people have asked, like, who is she? What does that mean? She is Sonang, and Sonang means a village guardian. It's a very significant aspect of Korean folk belief. The Sonang, the village deity, the spirit, the guardian spirit. That's who she is. And she's represented, I think, fairly well through different aspects of regional folk belief. But I agree with you. Yeah, I can understand how people's like, people might say is like, that's not what we are, and that's not how our religion is. But at the same time, as you said as well, filmmakers don't give a damn. They don't care.
A lot of it is
their views are
want
cinematic.
The entertainment value. So it's always these rituals, these mudang rituals are always so exciting, and of course you have to kind of it's these economies of scale where whenever you have a new film with a big shaman ritual, it needs to be crazier and crazier. You need to sacrifice more living things, more blood, it needs to be louder, more shouting, more screaming, and all that. And The Wailing is that, literally dueling rituals, which is a really thrilling scene, but it's like, well, okay, this is now just pure just stimulation, and I'm all for it because it works so well. But I'm not sure what it is. What it is kind of a a guidebook to what shamanism is necessarily.
People shouldn't use these films as guidebooks to Korean shamanism for sure.
No.
So,
Korean films that are both supposed to be realistic, especially if they're historical or anything.
We can pick apart Mr. Sunshine and historically
just any historic film where people have all their teeth.
Right, and the teeth are white.
Yes, and they're tall.
And I think what's really interesting about The Wailing, and again, I don't want to get into too many spoilers, is that I kind of want to connect it to The Exorcist in a way, just because of the religious connection. Is that the way I have viewed The Exorcist is it's a failure of the church. Their exorcism doesn't work. And
it doesn't last.
When Father Karras, when Father Karras says, "Take me,"
Spoiler alert.
And it's been.
I think people have seen this.
It was released in '73.
I know you've had like a 45-year.
Almost, So, when Karras wants, he tells the demon
he wants Pazuzu to go inside his body,
and which is also completely wrong, because Pazuzu in folklore isn't a evil spirit. It's completely been people believe Pazuzu was an evil spirit in the ancient folk belief, but he wasn't. He was a guardian. It was different. But when he says that, and he's like, take me, possess me. And he does, and he jumps out the window and he kills himself until they make Exorcist 3, and then he's back.
I haven't seen that
yet. There's a failure of the Catholic Church in that. There's a failure of religion. And to me, that was always kind of the point of that film. And I've had the pleasure of speaking with Friedkin, the director, through Twitter. Actually, we're friends on Twitter. And I spoke to him a couple times because he's adamant that it's not a horror film. It's a drama. And I'm like, dude, no, I don't know. I don't think you're going to get too many people who are going to agree with you with that. Okay, it's a horror film, or it's a drama with horror flourishes. I don't know. It's a horror film, but yeah,
like Jaws is an adventure film.
Yeah, right. So, but yeah, like talking to him, I think his point was that there's a failure of what we expect to win. And I think that's horrific. The things that we expect to succeed don't. And that can be horror. That can be horrific.
Yeah, but I think it wasn't just the church's failure, because most of it, the mother was an atheist who didn't believe. And it was a failure of all the doctors and everyone trying to figure out what was wrong with Reagan.
Yeah, well, sure. Yeah.
Because everyone is a failure of everyone.
And a lot of people can pin it to where he is able to persuade Pazuzu to come out of Reagan, and then he sacrifices himself, which is the Christ image of sacrifice and things like that. Yeah. So, but I think there's also kind of those religious aspects in these Korean films that use Korean shamanism as the foundation or the background of their narratives. So, but yeah, I don't know. Don't want to give too many spoilers away either. So,
okay.
I just want to note, people who are listening won't know this, but all three of us are wearing black shirts. I think I'm very proud of that.
There you go.
Oh, that was not intentional today.
And black headphones as well.
Not intentional as well. I also have a black synthesizer.
I'm wearing
I don't have one of those. Sorry.
I'm wearing a Bride of Frankenstein shirt, which is I think I was wearing when we did our last our Patreon hangout with our top patrons.
It's just a matte black shirt. No printed tee today.
Only our patrons on Patreon get to see the video though.
Yeah. But if you join Patreon,
you can see
our black shirts.
See all these black shirts.
It's really cool,
and you'll hear,
guys.
So, and here you go. Look, I'm going to lift my cat up into the camera. There you go. And how sweet is that?
Oh, that's kind of creepy.
That's contrast.
With two eyes.
Because she's all what he's all white now. He wants to get down. I got to let him out. So I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to open the door real quick so he can.
All right, do it.
So Pierce, how would you view the changes of Korean horror cinema in the last, say, 40, 45 years? And the reason I say 40, 45 years is because I'm 41. So I'm curious in how you think the cinema has changed in the last 4 decades or so.
Wait, for Korean cinema or for Korean horror cinema?
I would say that for Korean, I think Korean horror itself.
Did you mean horror cinema or just for Korean cinema?
Horror cinema, yes.
Oh, horror cinema, right. Well, if you go back to the 80s, which would be 40 years ago, there aren't really any Korean horror films. There's a few.
Oh my God, the 80s were 40 years ago. No, that's horror right there. Oh my!
But there's very little Korean horror cinema to speak of at that point. Although I would point out one incredible Korean horror film, which I believe is 1980 on the nose, Suddenly in Dark Nights. Absolutely amazing film. Highly recommend it. But that was very much an isolated, great horror movie. I don't know that director is specialized in horror at all. And it wasn't really a major genre. And, in the 80s were not a good time for Korean cinema in general. The 70s weren't good either. The industry had a good time in the 60s, and then because of the various military dictatorships, it was pretty much suffocated. There was too much censorship, and there was not a lot of money in the industry. And then you had the situation where people wanted to watch Hollywood movies, and the government created the system where if distributors wanted to import a film, they had to make local films, but all that really meant was that they would make these things that have been called quota quickies. So these really cheap
quota quickies.
Movies, that were shot like they would be conceived, shot, and edited in 2 weeks. And obviously that's not a recipe for success or quality.
That sounds like the old Hollywood system.
But you had a lot of not so great films, and then you had a few prestige pictures, and then you had the Korean New Wave came about, and then you had kind of socially conscious movies that were.
When was the Korean New Wave? What would you
that would start in the late 80s, so that would be around the time of the student demonstrations in the late 80s. Very much, also coming from people who had been, in these university groups, these kind of film groups that had very strong. Political leanings, and so that's kind of where that came about.
I mean, they might have been actually educated in film as well, just like the 70s. Wave.
Absolutely. Well, you have
in Hollywood.
They would have a little bit. Some things would not have been available, but a lot of it would have been bootlegged copies of things. And back in the 80s, the way people watched films, or people who cared about movies, was watching on I always forget what it's called, the American Forces Service Network. Is that what it's called?
AFN?
Armed Forces Network.
Yeah, that would be it. Because Bong Joon-ho and Park Chan-wook, for example, they watch all these random classic films, and they watch everything on AFN. That's how they got to know cinema, because things weren't available in the cinema, and they weren't available through more traditional means. But anyway, for horror cinema, there's not much going on again until the late 90s, and that's when the K-horror kind of thing happens in 1998 with Whispering Corridors, and that kicked off this whole series of films, and around the same time as J-horror, and that was that. And then it didn't really evolve. There was these notable films, and then a lot of copycats for a decade or so, and then it didn't really evolve until 5-6 years ago, and it started kind of trying to be more fresh again. And now I think what's very different now with Korean horror cinema is that, while before it was very much a small genre with generally lower budgets, and even films that had a good budget, like A Tale of Two Sisters, it's still a very self-contained film. It's a chamber piece. It's mostly in the one place. So these films are all quite cheap. Horror should be cheap, but now that's changed. Now horror is kind of becomes part of a bigger genre tapestry, shall we say? And you end up with films like so now like Train to Busan, and I mean, people will debate whether that's horror or not, but certainly that has horror elements, and it's a massive, big blockbuster. The Priest as well was a big movie, and you had, like last year, one of the most expensive films to come out last year, which you may well not have heard of, was called The Divine Fury, or Saja. It was one of the big summer releases. It's like an MMA exorcist, MMA trained exorcist. It's garbage, but it was a big budget movie that's kind of this horror action thriller.
I couldn't finish that. Yeah, I turned that off.
It's quite bad. It's very long. It's going on 2.5 hours.
And so that hurts a lot. That's a problem for a lot of people who are fans of Korean films in general. Is it does help to have maybe a list or something to go through, because I was like that. My first exposure to Korean film, I got the good one. I got some really good ones. So I thought, oh wow, great Korean film. Then Korean film's great, and then I went and got a bunch more, and they were not so great, and I kind of just petered out, and I stopped watching it for a while because I get kind of. Because you have to, anytime you're watching a film, I would say that is not of your language, maybe you have to invest a little bit more effort.
Sure.
Yeah. And so it's like, I want to make sure it's really good before I watch it. And
Right.
So yeah, very nervous about that. I saw D-War in the theater.
Ooh. I'm surprised you stayed in Korea. Well, no, I was shot in LA. That's a bad movie. That's a very bad movie.
I mean, it is almost, it is almost make fun so bad it's good level, but it's really bad.
Yeah, it's very much. There's nothing intentional about what they're doing there. It is just truly.
Yeah.
An awful film.
They were earnest. They were earnest. They really thought that they were making a great film. And that was the last bit I've seen of nationalism in the arts here, because
there's plenty of that.
Yeah, Korean critic panned the film when it came out, and he got death threats from the public because they felt like if you say anything bad about this film, you're saying bad things about Korea.
Yeah, I've gotten that as well sometimes, because these kind of bombastic nationalist films are generally not very good. So naturally, if I review them, those are not going to be positive reviews.
You're talking about Saving Private Kim?
What's
Taeguki. Saving Private Kim.
Okay. That movie's okay. I'll give
that was fine. I actually saw that in the theater with the director and Jackie Chan between my legs. Jackie Chan was sitting in front of me.
His
head was between my legs, and I was trying hard not to fart the entire time.
Sitting in the row in front of you.
Jackie Chan there?
Yeah.
He was promoting his Jackie's Kitchen restaurants that were opening, and he was a guest of the director to go see a viewing of Taeguki, and I was there with my friends because it was at the COEX Mall, and that was one of the only theaters that had English subtitles for the film, so we were going to go see. It's my first month in Korea. And so that's pretty cool. First month in Korea, I go and Jackie Chan comes up and shakes my hand and goes, "Hey, man, how's it going?" "Great, Jackie."
Very nice.
Yeah.
But, what were we on about? Nationalist films.
Sorry. National. I got you on a sidetrack. We're talking about the changes.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. I got some flack for piling on The Battleship Island. Which is a film I was super excited about and was very disappointed by. It's not a terrible film. It's just it has such great pedigree. It should be much better than it is, and it does kind of fall into that easy trap of nationalism and anti-Japanese sentiment, because that's supposedly is what general audiences want. And some people gave me some pretty significant flack for that, and people who you would even like people who would be like quite very liberal, and it was just I hit a nerve because Japan is a very, very sore point.
It was funny because I know one of the producers of that film at CJ. Well, she doesn't work at CJ anymore, but she told me before the film came out, she's like, "It's not going to do well." She's like,
the thing is, it might have done well. It actually was seen by a lot of people. It was close to 7 million viewers, but the budget was so high that it only basically just broke even. So it didn't fail. But the perception of the failure was completely exaggerated because there was a huge monopoly controversy around the film when it came out,
right?
As there have been several times. And so it had this extraordinary debut because it had this massive cast,
right?
Song Joong-ki and So Ji-seo, real heartthrob, getting all the crowds in. And then this, particularly for this film, the monopoly controversy around when theaters devote all their screens to the one film, and this idea that CJ, of course, is a sister company of CGV. So it's like, is CGV just giving preference to that? That's debatable. Certainly, when one film does well, all the theaters like to give that film all the theaters because people are buying tickets to it. So
right.
I mean, it's kind of hard to argue that in one sense. But anyway, the backlash was massive, so much so that after a huge weekend, it just tapered off really, really quickly. And people attacked it online. As you call what's the term? 평점 terror, rating terror, where they're on the rating portals, they just kind of give it really bad, like the all skill 1 star. So had it not had that controversy, I think it would have done better, and it would it was already not all that far from being a success. So if you'd taken away that kind of that bad press and a few more viewers, it would totally have been considered a successful film. So that was a bit unfair.
Right,
but I still think the film is very nationalist. So
yeah, right.
That doesn't change that.
And that's because of its content, because of its historical, its historical narrative. So, but back to horror films themselves, especially Korean horror films. What is it that do you separate what you want from a horror film generally, and what you would want from a Korean horror film? Or is there just a general desire for what you want out of a horror film itself?
It's a good question because I mean I watch a lot of cinema in general, and these days I've been watching more and more. I've been watching horror cinema. I mentioned that I really wasn't into horror when I was younger. Like I actively avoided horror films. I think part of that was when I was going to the cinema in university, I would go see every single new film that came out. And that was a really bad time for Hollywood horror. So like I was watching films like, was it the Dark or Silent Hill? And things like that. So really turned like,
what was his name? Uwe Boll?
Uwe Boll. Yeah, well, those ones weren't coming out in the cinema, but those, incidentally, both those films star Sean Bean. I'm not sure if there's a connection there, but of course he dies in both of them.
He dies in all the films.
Sean Bean dies in every movie.
He died in all the films. That's right. right.
But what I look for in a horror film, I like so many kinds of horror movies that it really depends.
Okay.
So obviously it can be, you're a Hammer fan. So if I'm watching a Hammer film, there's something about kind of the gothic appeal. There's something about you want the lurid aspects of a film to be fun. So whether that's a Hammer film or Italian horror from that time, Mario Bava.
Black Sunday or something.
Right. And then if you're doing like a slasher films, which I came to much later as well, and I really had trouble with slasher films for a long time. I still don't love all that many. I still
can't get into slasher. Yeah,
I like them more now, but because I appreciate them on kind of, I guess, on a different level. So I recently finished watching all the Friday the 13th films, and my favorite one.
You saw the same movie 13 times,
basically,
except for Jason X. Yeah, it's the only one
that's the one in space, right?
That's my favorite one. It's the best Friday the 13th film. It's completely ridiculous, but it's very enjoyable,
tongue in cheek.
Right. And it works. So there you go. So it's not a quality movie, but it just, the elements work very well. And then I don't know, everything. It's always different. Some films really have ideas and they work really well. And so you could, something like Rosemary's Baby really builds on something, for example. And some films are just so effective from a technical standpoint. So one of my favorites, really one of my favorites, is The Descent. Just I absolutely adore that film. I can watch it on repeat and it still scares me every time. And that's just Does it say anything? Not really. Do you feel it? Are you just in there with it the whole time because it's just so well made and so kind of unique in its production? Absolutely. And so, yeah, it always horror films will always hit me differently, so long as there's something new about them, I guess. If you know what horror is, if you know what horror works, if you know why you like horror, and you don't try to just copy it, but trying to do something different, whether that comes from a thematic point, whether it comes from a technical standpoint, who knows? I think it's very hard to make a good horror film, and when it works, because it's doing something novel, and hopefully doing it well.
Yeah. No, I think I mostly agree. Like, yeah, because there can be visceral horror films that just only deal with how you're responding to what you're seeing on the screen, like The Descent. It doesn't necessarily have a commentary. Some people might argue it does, but
sure.
I think that The Descent, I didn't see any particular commentary in it.
No, it's cool that it's a film that's fronted by women, but I don't think it makes a commentary. It's not making a commentary about women's empowerment or anything like that. But
I agree.
But it's just cool that it's framed that way.
Right.
And
right.
That's it.
Yeah. That's right. And then you can take a film like, for me, I think just because my wheelhouse of interest is folklore and the heritage of folklore, so I tend to lean more towards preferring films that have this take folklore as the foundation of the film itself. So I love the folk horror, like The Blood on Satan's Claw.
I watched that recently on your recommendation. I thought it was really cool, and it reminded me a lot of The Wailing, actually.
Yes, exactly.
I doubt Na Hong-jin ever saw The Blood in Satan's Claw, but it did remind me quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think
this kind of sense of pestilential evil, there's something that you can't quite understand, and you can't stop it.
That's right. And I think for that film itself, I love the way, especially the opening scene where it's filmed from the ground up. So you're in the dirt. And that's a really important aspect of the proletariat that's represented in that film.
Absolutely.
In the dirt. So there was a lot of smart choices for how the film was actually shot. So you have films like that that stem from folklore. But then you have also other folk horror films like Witchfinder General.
I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, okay. So Vincent Price, not particularly scary in the way. So not scary in the way, say, like The Exorcist is scary or The Wailing is scary, or The Grudge or anything like that. But it's scary from the point of authority, where somebody can have a point of power and they can use it to overpower you. And I think that can be very timely today with a lot of the stuff that's going on politically around the world in different places. So it's, the film is about Matthew Hopkins, he was the self-opposed Witchfinder General, and he hunted witches throughout the countryside of England and whatnot. And the whole point of that is there was no such thing as witches. They didn't exist. There was nobody who made deals with the devil because the devil doesn't exist. So that was the fear that people had just by living their lives and being the lower class. They could be highlighted as someone who's hurting society, and that's frightening. If you really think about it, that's a really scary thing. And I think that's an aspect of horror film that not a lot of people respect. They want things to be ghosts or monsters or demonic possession. But there are things that could be kind of considered revisionist horror that are a lot scarier because they're grounded more in reality. So I think a lot of films like that, that's what I kind of prefer. And I've come to prefer that more as I've gotten older. So, but I still love me some Hammer. give me gothic horror.
I adore Hammer. Now, Hammer films are not scary at all, but
not anymore.
They're great. Just Sunday afternoon,
They're moody,
very colorful, beautiful sets, and
yeah.
Oh God, those casts I adore a good Hammer film.
Yeah, absolutely. Christopher Lee. Well, not only the cast, you have the same producers and writer, Jimmy Sangster. Yeah. You owe me a beer. We said at the same time. We said Jimmy Sangster at the same time.
We did. Is it who's the composer? Is it Hollingsworth? Is that it?
Yeah. Right? Yes, that's right. Yeah, he did at least the earliest horror films, like through like 57, 58 to maybe the late 60s.
Right.
Or up to the mid 60s. By the time Christopher Lee came back for like Prince of Darkness and stuff like that, I think he was still composing at that point. But he may have left, like a lot of the people had left by the time they did. What is it? The seven. God, I'm blanking.
Seven Brides.
Samurai, seven golden vampires, or
that's the one. That's the one.
Yeah. But Hammer's last great film is Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter.
I also haven't seen that.
Yeah, that's their last great film until they had their resurgence a few years ago, and then a couple of good entries.
That they did. Was Let Me In the first one they did, or the second one?
Well, that was the first. Their Hammer Studios when they
Woman in Black, was that the first one they did?
No, the first one was called Beyond the Rave.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, and that was. They're kind of testing the waters a little. They're dipping their toe. They released that in maybe 10-minute increments over a series of several weeks on YouTube. And
so it was Quibi before Quibi.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's right. It's all right. It's about vampires who go to a rave in London. I think it's in London, and
that's sorry, interjection. That reminds me, I saw something for the first time recently that I absolutely adored. The Hunger.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Tony Scott one. The first scene. It's. I mean, talk about vampires going to a rave. It's David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve go to a rave, and who's playing at the rave? It's oh Christ! It's one of those. Just anyway. I can't remember. The song
Prodigy
is Bella Lugosi is Dead. Is the
song
that
Bauhaus.
Bauhaus. There you go.
Yeah.
The opening scene of that film is extraordinary and one of the finest sequences in cinema.
Yeah. So, anyway, so those are the kind of films and the horror films that I go in that I'm really interested in. The revisionist.
What have you liked recently then? Because there's been obviously this resurgence of very kind of a critically acclaimed horror. Which ones have worked for you?
Let's see. Well, I still don't particularly like a lot of the mainstream films. I don't like James Wan films. I don't like
Conjuring and all those.
I don't like the Conjuring films. I think they're cheap. The first one was all
very well made.
Very well made. Yeah. They're well made films because they have a lot of money, and James Wan knows how to frame a shot.
Yeah, it's a good technician.
Yeah, but I don't think he's a very good storyteller of horror. Where and this kind of comes back to what I was just saying, is where I think James Wan could frame a film, but he can't tell a horror story. But if you go back to Witchfinder General, where it's not on its surface scary, and maybe people could argue that I can't remember it was Reed. What was his name? James Reed, who directed the film. It could be argued where he wasn't a very good technician, but it was a much better film just because there was more heart in it. There was more essence of horror, but it was under the surface. Where someone like James Wan or the guy that I absolutely hate is Eli Roth. I hate Eli Roth films.
We can all agree on that.
Yeah.
He's awful.
Absolute. And he's a pompous. Okay, Joe, I'm going to swear. So if you want to cut it up, if you want to edit it
you've already sworn already, so sorry.
Good. He's a pompous piece of shit. I hate Eli Roth as a filmmaker, and he just as an individual, he seems like a piece of garbage.
I've heard some bad personal stories from him, which I would not share.
Well, he did a whole series, maybe 2 years ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, where it's like Eli Roth's History of Horror. And the trailer says like a documentary series has never been made before that comments on the history of horror. It's like Mark Gatiss, whose History of Horror series is called History of Horror, might have a lot to say to you about that. And Mark Gatiss is a far better writer than you are. Yeah, so there's a lot more that I dislike about modern horror than like. Probably kind of sticking on line with what I've been talking about was more revisionist horror. I really loved A Field in England. And
I like that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of folk horror in that. Which goes back to
Ben Wheatley is really into folk horror. I was rewatching Kill List the other day, which I really like.
Kill List is excellent, and Kill List obviously inspired by The Wicker Man.
Oh, obviously, yeah. Speaking of The Wicker Man, where do you land on Midsommar?
Midsommar is excellent. So that's what I was going to get to. Midsommar was probably one of the best. I would argue maybe one of the best horror films of the last 20 years.
I need to run and get my charger. Give me 1 second.
Okay. So Midsommar, excellent. Everyone see that. Hereditary, I thought was excellent. Kind of revisionist. I don't like a lot of modern horror films that are independent, but they kind of wish they weren't. So things like The Babadook.
You said you don't, or you do like it?
I don't. I want these films.
I like The Babadook.
Yeah, I didn't like it. And one of the reasons I thought it was okay, I should say it's like I thought it was all right. I thought it was okay. Mm-hmm. But then all of this, the surrounding admiration for this film, I was just thinking like, has no one else, have you not seen other horror films? Watch more horror. It was okay, but then I think I kind of started disliking it because of all of the kind of I think are not very well thought out arguments in support of it. And I didn't particularly like It Follows. It was fine. It was okay. Had a daft ending. The climax was daft. They're all right, but I think films that touch on things more like I said, Hereditary, The Witch, Robert Eggers, excellent film. Again, that's folk horror that deals with things that we don't understand and our perceptions of what will help us and save us fail. That's the essence of that film. That's the horror of that film. That's the horror of the narrative of that film. But other movies like A Quiet Place, it was like, it's all right. They went too far with they had an excellent trope that they didn't use well enough. And a lot of the problems I have with that film, I think would be spoilers. If anyone wants to talk to me about A Quiet Place, send us a message on Facebook and I'll chat back about why I think that's an overrated film. So, I think the best films in the last couple of years: Hereditary, The Witch, The Lighthouse. I thought excellent. Midsommar, excellent films. I really liked The Ritual. The Ritual I thought was really fun. That. Yeah, The Ritual was fun. It was fine. It was entertaining. Didn't take itself very seriously. Again, it has a lot of folklore flourishes in the narrative itself. So I thought they were great. That's kind of where I stand with modern horror. Netflix has some decent stuff, but I think horror is kind of tripping over itself. It's doing a lot of stupid things with its marketing, with things like Veronica, saying like people couldn't finish this film and stuff like that. It's like there's no need to do stuff like that. That wasn't a very scary film. It was all right. If you've seen The Exorcist or any other possession film, you can get through Veronica without much of a problem. So, and The Wailing is easily, going back to Korean horror, easily one of my favorite horror films of the last 20 years. Yeah. So, How about for you?
I'm kind of kind of the same ones, honestly. I'm a huge fan of Ari Aster. I thought Hereditary just completely freaked me out when I saw it in the cinema, and I thought I think Midsommar is terrific. You know, I mean, it has its detractors, and I understand why it does. I don't think it's a copy of The Wicker Man at all. I think if anything, it's more indebted to like Ingmar Bergman.
Oh yeah, well yes, The Seventh Seal, or like the way he frames the shots.
Well, one of the characters is called Bergman in the film, for God's sake.
Right.
And although, in even more so, what's that guy's name? Albert Brooks. There's so much Albert Brooks in that movie. But I thought that was extraordinary. So much so that I thought I even cried watching the film. So I don't normally do when I watch a horror movie, but that's me. And of course the Wailing is great. I love Robert Eggers. The Witch and The Lighthouse are awesome. I enjoyed The Babadook and It Follows more than you, but I think they're more just good horror films as from the technical aspect. Babadook is just a very traditional in many ways, and doesn't really push down very much. It looks great. The scares are very effective, and it has a pretty well defined character arc, which kind of draws you into the story. It Follows just has a really novel concept that works really well. I think the music is really cool, and it has a few kind of very effective scares. I recall there's that 360-degree shot and things like that. But
the beach scene is good. I really like the beach scene.
The beach scene is cool as well.
Yeah.
I think it was just a very cool idea that it's just literally fear itself, and it's just a very cool concept, and that's kind of where it is. Then his next film, which is not a horror film, Under the Silver Lake, is very, very problematic. Very, very problematic movie. I don't know if you've seen that, but
no, I haven't.
Pretty misogynistic and very strange film to be seeing in 2018 or 2019 film? Was it last year or the year before? I can't remember.
Okay.
Anyway, nothing else comes to mind straight away as like 5-star favorites.
Yeah. I think if I really were to sit down and think about my favorite horror films of the last say 20 years, I'd have to go all the way back to the early 2000s and say Ginger Snaps, Dog Soldiers. I'm a big werewolf fan. I have an Instagram account dedicated entirely to werewolves. A massive fan of therianthropy, which is the greater umbrella term of humans changing into other animals. So lycanthropy, werewolves, and things like that. So love those films. Don't Breathe was fun. I thought that was
that.
Yeah, that was fun. But the idea of revisionist horror, like a revisionist Western, so like Pale Rider with Clint Eastwood, people talk about that being a revisionist Western, or High Noon, going all the way back to the 50s. So being a revisionist Western, where it doesn't really become a shoot 'em up kind of action Western film until the end. I think horror has a lot of great revisionist films. So I've already mentioned like a Witchfinder in general. I think a lot of the folk horror films are revisionist. They don't follow the tropes of horror that people expect. The Wicker Man is another one, but The Wicker Man then has that conclusion, that ending, which I still think is the scariest scene in horror cinema.
It's funny because for me, the scariest scene in horror film is the end of Don't Look Now, and I find it absolutely remarkable that when people in 1973 who were watching horror films would have watched The Wicker Man and Don't Look Now on a double bill.
Right.
Which,
my God.
It's pretty insane. Two of the greatest horror films of all time, and they were made. The Wicker Man was the B side basically of that double bill.
Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So this idea of revisionist film. So then A Field of England as well. A lot of people argue that it's not a horror film. I argue that it is. But bring it back to Korean cinema. There are people within different circles of horror cinema that discuss horror, say on Facebook and different groups, that argue that Parasite, arguably the best Korean film ever made, and I know you're a massive fan,
Sure.
They argue that it is a horror film. but where do you stand on that? And I will say before you start talking about it, I still haven't seen it.
Oh,
I haven't seen it yet.
A mutual friend of ours did
You're
this.
like the only person in the world.
Yeah, did the subtitles, English subtitles for it.
I know. Sorry, I'm really. I just still haven't seen it. Yeah, and it's not.
You're
I
for a
just.
treat.
I've watched it 3 or 4 times now. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not because I don't want to see it. It's just I don't know. I just kind of haven't gotten around to it.
I understand you got to get in the right brain space for something sometimes.
Well, I watch movies all the time. Like I'm probably going to throw on Curse of the Werewolf tonight, but or a Paul Naschy film or something. But stuff that I've seen 100 times. Yeah,
I'm really glad.
To answer your question,
sat down and watched it. Yeah.
So Pierce, where do you stand on that question?
I think it's kind of kind of like a silly distinction at this point, because you have something like Parasite is such like a genre hybrid. There's so much in there. Sure, there are some horror elements in there. To call it a horror film is kind of pointless. I mean, the Host is also another massive genre mashup from Bong Joon-ho. It has more horror elements, I would say, and people call that a horror, and I think that's a bit more of a fitting label. Sure. It's right there on the poster, but Parasite, I mean, I would say no. I'm not going to criticize people for saying it certainly has horror elements, maybe, but I would not categorize it as a horror film. Personally.
Okay.
But you're right, mashup of genres. I mean, I would say like there's people who are the first half fans and people who are the second half fans of Parasite.
Spoiler!
I'm trying not to respond because
okay.
Yeah, I'm going to get into hot water pretty quickly.
Well, because I think
you need to watch this movie, Sean.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do this then. Pierce,
spoil Sean.
I'm gonna no.
So we're threatening you because by the time this gets released, you should have already watched it because I'm going to tell everyone who's listening to spoil it for Sean.
Well, this is not going to get released publicly for like 2 weeks. I know. 3
You're
weeks.
getting like 3 week notice now.
Okay.
You got 3 weeks now.
So let's do this. Because I do know that the commentary of the film could very, very well lend itself to the theme of the podcast and the tour, being very dark, a dark aspect of life in modern Seoul. So it could be something we could talk about. So Pierce, would you be willing to come back sometime in the near future to talk about just Parasite?
Sure.
Okay, because I know you made your was it your top 100 films in Korea the last? What was it? Because you listed Parasite, maybe number 1.
That was for the last decade.
Okay, the last decade.
Yes, the 2010s, as it were. So yes, that was my number 1.
Yeah. So it
was very close.
Oh, really? Okay. Don't tell us what number 2 was then. But I do know you had the Wailing in the top 10.
Well, yes.
Yes, good. But you also had Train to Busan on there, and it's like, I'll buy you.
That was not in my top 10. That was no, but on 10. Your list. That was down at number 30, I think.
Okay. I'll still buy you a beer.
It's a very solid little movie.
I'll still buy you a beer because it's no secret that I don't like that film.
Yeah. And apparently, I owe you one for what was it?
Poking fun
what did we? Jimmy Sangster. I owe you one for Jimmy Sangster, right?
Yeah, there you go. Okay, sounds good. Okay, and I hope we can do that soon. Okay, so before we finish up, what are your top 3 Korean horror films and your top 3 horror films generally?
Okay, I'm going to be just a little bit strict with my Korean horror films. So I'm going to be like more the traditional kind of K horror.
Sure.
So I'm doing that just so we've already mentioned how much The Wailing is great, so I'm just going to lop that one off, so I'm not going to qualify it. Okay. And so the 3 films, I'm going to say Possessed, which I already talked about, Tale of Two Sisters, which I already talked about, and also Memento Mori, which I think I've mentioned. I didn't say what it was.
I don't know if we did.
Memento Mori is the second film in the Whispering Corridors series. So Whispering Corridors films are... they're all these horror films set in girls-only high schools. and they all focus on a female grudge spirit terrorizing the girls in the school. They're all independent narratives. There's no continuity whatsoever. They all feature completely new cast, and they're all debut films from obviously new directors. And Memento Mori is the second one. There have been 5 that have been released. A 6th one was recently shot and is awaiting release. And the second one is called Memento Mori. I think it's the best one. It's a film about there's these girls who are friends in a school, and they clearly have something that is probably a lesbian relationship, and one of them commits suicide, and then her spirit may or may not be kind of terrorizing the people who had been sort of teasing them, sort of bullying them. And then it takes place over just a single day with sort of extended flashbacks exploring their relationship. And things kind of escalate in a really, really surprising way in that film. It's not exactly very, very scary, though it does have some effective scenes, but it is just an incredible film. It has there's great drama, and the director, it's actually 2 directors, Min Kyu-dong and Kim Tae-young, who both went on to have very impressive careers. They have a real feel for the characters, and some of these actresses became very famous. One of them is Kong Yo-jin, who's like the face of E-Mart these days, among other things. She's a big K-drama. Just that's like you see her every day, you know.
Right.
The film is just has this. It builds to this incredible crescendo, and it has these very early on, it's from 1999, and to have kind of lesbian themes in a Korean film at that time, and so sensitively drawn is quite special. And it's really well done, and it blends into the way it's the horror kind of comes out of that. It comes out of this sphere of integrating into society within this microcosm of this girls only high school. It's really well done. Highly recommend that one. So those would be my top 3 Korean horror films. And you asked me also for just general overall horror films.
Yeah.
I would have to go with I'm going to go with Don't Look Now, which is just such a balls out classic. It's amazing.
I should play that on the watch party soon. Yeah.
I'm also going to say The Descent, which I've already mentioned, because that is just the one that I can rewatch as often as I want and never get bored of it. And then the other one, is in terms of when it was released, somewhat in the middle, I'm going to say Candyman, which I just absolutely adore.
Okay. All right.
I didn't say that again.
Probably.
Candyman is so great for me. I came to it quite late. I watched it for the first time like 2 years ago, and I've seen it like 3 times already since then. And
the Candyman is a great film
incredible.
in the sea of terrible 90s horror films.
It's 19.
Sure,
I saw it in 93.
Yeah.
I saw it in 93 on video.
Yeah, I think it's 90. It's 92. It's a 92 film. Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, the combination of there's such an incredible, so many social layers there. I mean, it's a Clive Barker story that is quite different, but then the way Bernard Rose, the director, adapts the story into this kind of African American context in Chicago, and it's so effective, and it's quite surprising that a white filmmaker can do this quite well. And a lot of African American critics kind of gone, this is a surprisingly effective film for these themes, and we're all very impressed. And it's very, very scary, and it has this beautiful romantic flourish, and towards the end, the music is great. It's just a great movie. I cannot recommend that enough.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great list. Good.
3 horror films.
Excellent. Okay, then just before for the end there, where can people see your work? I know you mentioned at the beginning. Please mention again, and maybe mention a little bit about what your wife's doing.
So the Korean Film Council English website is koreanfilm.or.kr. I contribute quite a lot of that content. I also write reviews for ScreenAnarchy.com, and you can find stuff I've written over the years on modernkoreancinema.com. So those are my main outlets. So I mentioned my wife. My wife is a fairly interesting person. She's a filmmaker herself. And she made 2 feature films called Crush and Blush and The Truth Beneath from 2008 and 2016, and films that I adore. I'm very biased, but I certainly liked the first one long before I met her.
Good.
And was very much a fan of hers. And currently she's on post-production for her first Netflix series. It's called The School Nurse Files. It stars Jung Yimi and Nam Ji-yeon.
Excellent.
Sweet.
Excellent. Awesome. Thanks, Pierce. That was great. That was
Thank you
excellent
so
Been my
much. All right. Well, so thank you everyone for listening. Just remind you that we do still run. If you want more, we have the Dark Side of Soul Coast Walk. You go to darksideofsoul.com. Also like to thank our music by Sodak-san, which you can find as Jeju Digital on Bandcamp, or become a patron and you can get some free tracks.
Yeah, we got a new track coming up soon.
Included tracks. Yeah, you get some tracks.
Exclusive. Yeah.
We want to thank our top tier patrons from Patreon: Angel Earl, Joel Bonomini, Jamie Staley, and Sharon Cullen. I just sent some new swag your way, so check your mailboxes soon. All right, everyone. Thank you, Pierce. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Pierce.
Thank you, everyone. Until next time.
Thanks, guys.
Stay spooky.
Good night.